The film starts by showing a man who is slaughtering a group of police officers in a building, then suddenly another police force appears and manages to arrest the man. During the interrogation, this man claimed his name was Evoin and the policeman's name was Paul. Then, Paul asked Evoin to tell the chronology of the brutal massacre he had committed. This massacre killed 18 police officers. Initially, Evoin refused. But after being pressed, finally he wanted to tell everything. Evoin started telling everything from the beginning. Initially, Evoin visited an abandoned hospital building that was used as a place for underprivileged people to live. Evoin arrives to apply for a job as a night security guard. He was received right away by Bonhomme, the building manager. In fact, before Evoin, there had been many people working as night watchmen there, but none of them lasted long. Bonhomme then escorted Evoin to the room he was going to occupy. There, Evoin meets a patient named DeWitt who is mentally disturbed. DeWitt asked if Evoin was good at fighting. Evoin replied that as much as possible, he refrained from fighting. Because if he is already angry, then he can get out of control. Then we are shown a flashback to when Evoin beat up a group of gangsters in the past. At that time, it seemed that Evoin had easily slaughtered them all one by one very brutally. But here, we are still not told what problem happened between Evoin and this group of gangsters, until he could become that brutal. After DeWitt left, Evoin was surprised by the appearance of a woman named Janet and her paralyzed son, Benazin. Janet reminds Evoin to stay alert, because the building is very haunted. Usually, the ghosts will appear at midnight. After that, Evoin went to the canteen for dinner and looked for more information about the ghost that Janet told him about. Bonhomme explains the situation in the building, where lots of children have disappeared in the middle of the night. For this reason, Evoin was assigned as a caretaker of the building when the occupants were sleeping, so that incidents like this would not happen again. Bonhomme said that they still don't know who kidnapped the children. But the people there suspected that it was all caused by ghosts. At the end of the conversation, Bonhomme gave Evoin an amulet. The movie scene shifts and shows flashbacks of who Evoin really was. In fact, he used to be a gangster who was most feared, who was betrayed by his own leader. The gangster leader named Roy. That night, Roy let Evoin be attacked by a group of gangsters from the enemy side who wanted to kill him. But easily, Evoin turned the tide and succeeded in slaughtering them all. Unfortunately, Roy managed to escape. Unable to accept being betrayed, Evoin went straight to the headquarters and then slaughtered all of its members without mercy. Although he was cornered, but again, Evoin managed to turn things around. Roy and all of his men died at Evoin's hands. Since then, Evoin decided to repent and find another job. The scene of the film shifts and shows a mother pleading with the police to find her kidnapped child. But the police officers ignored the mother's cries. Bonhomme told Evoin that the police in the city don't care about the fate of ordinary people like them. At midnight, when Evoin was sweeping the building, Evoin accidentally saw 3 masked men trying to kidnap a child. He then fought with one of them. Unfortunately, Evoin was hit by a knife. It didn't stop there, they also stepped on Evoin's face many times until he was unconscious. It turns out that the children in the building were kidnapped by a group of masked troops who are adherents of a heretical sect, based in the basement of the building. They only come out to look for prey when all the people are sleeping. When the time comes, the hostages will be sacrificed for satanic worship. Meanwhile, a dying Evoin is quickly rescued by Bonhomme and the others. In the end, Evoin regained his consciousness after previously not breathing. After realizing, Evoin then told Bonhomme about the masked troops who kidnapped the children in the building. Evoin blames himself for the incident, because protecting the residents of the building is his main duty. However, Evoin would not remain silent. One day, the masked troops returned to the building and tried to kidnap Benazin. Once again, Evoin has to deal with one of them, whose name turns out to be Martin. Here, Evoin was unconscious. But suddenly, he got back up and managed to kill Martin. But when he wanted to save Benazin, suddenly, Evoin's legs became paralyzed, and strangely Evoin heard a scary voice whispering in his ear. He felt like he was being controlled by a monstrous figure. Shortly after, Evoin recovered. But he again blamed himself for failing to save Benazin. He is still confused as to why he can't control his own powers. The movie scene switches, showing Benazin being locked up with the other victims. The leader of the sect is Mephisto. Mephisto said that the ritual could only be carried out if they had one more child. Long story short, the masked troupe came back to the building to kidnap another child. Realizing this, Avoline tried to block them. He did succeed in repelling the masked troops. But again, Avoline experienced a stronger pressure that could paralyze his strength. Meanwhile, the masked troopers began to fear Avoline, who was only a night guard, but he was able to kill 4 of their members. So, they suspected that Avoline was assisted by magical powers. It turns out, the strange thing experienced by Avoline is the impact of the ritual performed by Bonhomme. When he saved Avoline, it turned out that at that time Avoline had already died because he was finished off by masked men. So, to bring Avoline back to life, Bonhomme makes an agreement with the demon of death. Finally, Avoline was able to live again, but his power was controlled by the demon. That's what makes Avoline unable to control his own strength. Avoline suspected that the troops would definitely come again. For that, he ordered all the residents of the building to hide in a locked room. After that, he turned off all electricity, forcing the masked troops to go up to the top floor and face Avoline again. Avoline managed to kill them all and only one person left, Joni. But Joni manages to incapacitate Avoline and prepares to kill him. Luckily, Janet and the others rushed out to save Avoline, forcing Joni back into the basement. Meanwhile, the demon of death met Avoline and said that he could turn Avoline into a very brutal figure to defeat the masked men. But all of that must come with a condition. Avoline must surrender his whole body and soul to the demon of death. And Avoline will be taken to the demon realm to become his slave. Without thinking twice, Avoline agreed to these conditions so he could save the children. Meanwhile, Mephisto gives Joni a special oil liquid, where the oil is made from the sacrifice of a pregnant woman who is believed to be able to paralyze the magic power of the demons. Avoline, who has recovered after surrendering all his soul to the demon, he then goes to the basement to find the masked army headquarters, which now only has 3 people left. They are Mephisto, Maya, and Joni. In the end, he found them. Avoline again confronts Joni. Joni then took out the liquid sacrificial oil. But the liquid didn't work at all, and instead it only added to Avoline's strength. The fight was quite fierce, but in the end Avoline managed to kill Joni. Feeling threatened, Mephisto and Maya then released all the captives and they quickly ran away from there. Back to the interrogation room, Paul then asks if Avoline managed to catch Mephisto. Avoline replied that he had not managed to catch Mephisto, because the Mephisto that Avoline was looking for was right in front of him. Avoline said that while pointing at Paul, who was actually Mephisto. In fact, Avoline deliberately got himself caught so he could reveal the true identity of Mephisto, a sect leader who also became a police officer to make him easier to find victims to be worshipped as sacrifices. And Avoline could tell that Paul was Mephisto because he smelled the same. Mercilessly, Avoline finished off Paul, aka Mephisto. According to the agreement, after the mission was completed, Avoline then gave himself up to be taken by the demon of death, and the film ended. Alright fellas, that's the video for today. I hope you enjoy it and see you in the next video.